Dear music lovers, welcome to our last episode in conversation with David Whitwell. Today we are talking about the topics, the need to reinvent music education. I leave the stage to Maestro David Whitwell.
The topic of this discussion is music education. Teaching music is the oldest profession on earth. Plato dates music education to 13,000 years ago. That's older than any written language. That's older than the use of numbers. According to Plato, music education stressed not just the pleasure of music, but also for the education of the interperson, for development of character, and to appreciate beauty. In general, the ancient Greeks' goal was similar to that of the engraving on their ancient temple, "Know thyself." These values remained in place for the next 12,000 years until the late Middle Ages, when there was a revolution, and I use that word carefully because it means revalue, a revolution by the church, and that revolution was to begin writing music on paper. This changed the whole history of music, and it gave four new characteristics. First of all, now music is for the eye, not the ear. Second, function replaces feeling. The whole point of the new notation was to make it easier to train church singers. Third, the church outlawed emotion. And so in the new notation system, there is not a single symbol that has anything to do with feeling or emotion. And the church was very serious about this. They were always telling their members, you should not go to the theater, you should not go to the Colosseum, because there you will be exposed to emotions. And Saint Basil in the 3rd century said, a good Christian should not even laugh, because laughing is a form of emotion. And four, finally, music became a branch of mathematics. And there's a nice story from the 10th century about a person who was going to lecture to a group of students on the subject of music. And the lecturer started talking about these mathematical relationships with music. And a student raised his hand and said, teacher, when are you going to start talking about music? And the teacher answered, but this is how you talk about music. Well, it's very significant that all of these characteristics carried over in today's music education. For one thing, what is on paper is not music, that's grammar. And on the other hand, we're teaching what's on paper today because it's easier to talk about than talking about students' emotions. And it even carries into our language. We will say in rehearsal, watch out for intonation at letter B. But of course, you don't look for intonation, you hear intonation. We're emphasizing the past instead of the present. We're still teaching function. I had a discussion recently with a retired man in Austin who had been given as a present a CD of which contained Mozart piano concertos. He had never listened to anything like this. So when he put it on one day, he was completely astonished and carried away by the experience. And so when talking to him, I said, well, surely during your education, you must have been exposed to some classical music. He had done all of his education here in Austin, including 4 years at the University of Texas. And he said, no, I never had any mention of classical, any kind of music in my education. Well, we talked a little further, and it turned out that he played trombone in high school for 3 years, and he played trombone for 4 years at the University of Texas in the marching band. But in his mind, that was a social event. He never associated those 7 years of playing trombone with music. Also, today, emotion is still not talked about in the classroom. We're also teaching some false concepts. We say we're teaching rhythm, but we're really teaching mathematics. We're not talking about emotion at all. We say we're teaching harmony, but we're really teaching a foreign symbolic language. And the harmony teacher you'll never hear the harmony teachers use words like pain or sorrow. We say we're teaching music when we teach instruments, but we're really just teaching manual technique. We're also teaching some things that are really unusable. Let me give an example of what I mean by unusable things. Example of the sonata form. If you're in a class where they're talking about form, the teacher will put on the board sonata, and underneath it he'll say the sonata has 3 parts, and he'll write exposition section, development section, recapitulation. And all of these 3 parts have parts underneath. The exposition has 4 parts: first theme, a transition, a second theme, and closing section. And you end up with something on the board that looks like somebody's family tree. There's one word at the top, and all the other information trickles down like a big triangle. Well, that's all true information, but it is not usable information. By that I mean, as a conductor or a player or an audience member, you never stand at the side of a sonata form, like the side of a barn. You understand a sonata form from the beginning. And if we're going to teach anything usable, it has to be some theory that starts at the beginning and accounts for the changes as we hear a sonata form through to the very end. So it's true information, but it cannot be used. I should amend that by saying you would use it only if you taught this course sometime. Until the year 1300, this church description of the nature of music dominated music education. But in the year 1300, we get a new perspective, the Renaissance, which means the rebirth. And in this case, it means the rebirth of the ancient values of music. First of all, we now, the restoration of the emphasis of feeling becomes just as important as the intellect. Leonardo da Vinci said, "The tears come from the heart, not from the brain." And the great composer Maurice Ravel said, "Music must be emotional first and intellectual second." This emphasis of the importance of feeling that begins with the Renaissance has been testified to by all following major composers. Robert Schumann said, "Music is to me the perfect expression of the soul." Berlioz said, "The prevailing characteristic of my music is passionate expression." Chopin. My universe is the soul and heart of man. Mahler. The best in music is not found in the notes. And Wagner said, music is the speech of passion. This new definition of music was reflected, of course, in the performance beginning in the Renaissance. One critic in 1702 wrote, the artist was performing as seized with an unavoidable agony. He tortures his violin. He racks his body. He is agitated like one possessed of an irresistible motion. And a first-person account of listening to Corelli play violin wrote, his eyes will sometimes turn red as fire. His face will become distorted. His eyeballs will roll as if in agony. He does not look like the same man. And also, listeners in the Renaissance were affected by this new emphasis on emotion. Samuel Pepys in 1668, after a concert, wrote, the music ravished me and did so wrap my soul as to make me really sick, as if I were in love. An audience member, after a Handel performance, said, a stranger, seeing how the audience was so affected, would have imagined that they had all been distracted. This foregoing new practice of music, which restored the ancient values of music, however, failed to inspire corresponding values in music education. So modern music education is still mostly functional, teaching you players and singers how to their technique, and it's still devoid of comment on emotion. So, in my view, it's time to reinvent music education. First of all, it needs to be centered in performance, not in talking about music. That is, it's experiential learning, not listening to lectures. It will require new pedagogy and new materials. And it must focus on two basic areas of concentration, neither of which is possible today under the kind of music education we have today. First, there must be a focus on the development of the self-identity of the child, discovering his own unique emotional template. Music education through performance and contemplation can do this. No one else in the school is prepared to do this. The process begins with what Wagner points out as the music allows us to gaze into the inner essence of ourselves. And Goethe, the great writer, explained, when we encounter something which is great, or beautiful, or significant, it must be woven into the fabric of ourself. We must become one with it to create a new and better self in us. But we're speaking here of fully 1/2 of the human brain. At present, we do nothing to educate the child his emotional awareness. We leave it to the child to discover this outside the school. The second area of major changes is to create new goals for music education. And by the way, music education is the only subject in school which gives students fundamental education in the right hemisphere of the brain. And it's the only subject in school which is presented entirely in the present tense. Music offers the performing students a direct exposure to a great mind. This is not true in the other liberal arts subjects like literature or painting, where an object, like a book or a canvas, stands between the student and the great mind. So finally, I want to propose 5 new areas of emphasis for his goals, new goals for music education. The first has to do with truth. Music students experience beauty as a form of truth. There's a very interesting comment by a 12th century writer, Godfrey Strasbourg, and he makes this point. He says, if music is performed heartless or soulless or superficially, or the musician is not in the mood, then the result cannot even be called music. The second new goal is spirituality. Music students experience a world of higher spirituality. This world was described by E.T.A. Hoffman when he writes that musicians say, our kingdom is not of this world. He's explained this new realm as a realm of feeling which we had never before felt. The 19th century philosopher Jean-Paul Richter called this new realm the echo of our inner souls. Herbert Spencer, a great 19th century philosopher, said, the realm of things we have not seen and will not see. The third area of a new goal for music education is has to do with morality. A 15th century Garofalo said that music cultivates the mother of morals. And a number of early writers speak of this with regard to the Greek philosophers. The 19th century philosopher Francis Bacon made a nice phrase, virtue is nothing but inward beauty. Beauty is nothing but outward virtue. Robert Schumann said, the laws of morality are the same as art. And a 13th century philosopher, Aristides, warns, there are some musicians out there who have taken the nature of music into depravity and cultural corruption. The fourth new goal I want to propose is character. Music education develops character. Many ancient Greek philosophers talked about this. Aristotle wrote, enough has been said to show that the power of music forms character. Shakespeare, in The Merchant of Venice, wrote, of that man who has no music in himself, let no such man be trusted. And of course, I'm sure everyone has read the many comments by Martin Luther about the importance of music developing character. The famous Japanese industrialist Suzuki wrote and said, teaching music is not my main purpose. I want to make good citizens. And there's one warning given by a 5th century BC Aristophanes, who said, your choice of repertoire displays your character quite efficiently. And finally, the fifth, good manners. music helps develop good manners. Aristoteles in the 3rd century BC wrote, the conduct, the molding of conduct, whether better or worse manners, lies in music education. In other words, music education can teach either better manners or weaker manners. Pythagoras, 6th century BC. In music are obtained the remedies for human manners. Plutarch, 1st Symphony AD. The ancient Greeks thought music was necessary for service of manners. Clement of Alexandria, 2nd century BC, AD. Music is to be studied for the sake of composing manners. Wagner, music is to work on manners. And the Kaiser Joseph of Austria, in giving permission to have a new theater built, said, this new theater must work for ennobling manners. Well, this reminds me, this emphasis on music and manners reminds me of the great 17th century tradition in Germany of tower music, where musicians playing from city towers 3 times a day, they played music to wake people up. They played music to indicate when it was time to stop for lunch, and they played music when it was time to leave the fields and go back home. So 3 times a day in almost every village in Germany, the citizens heard what they call spiritual music floating down from above. They did not mean religious music, but just music that was noble and lifted the spirit. Well, I've talked to 2 German philosophers who each believed that this, having your whole life hearing this noble music floating down from above, they believed that this really defined the character of the German citizen for the next 200 years. So, in closing, let me suggest this. If you're concerned about the falling of public music and public manners, I think the best way to begin improvement is to take music education off of the sidelines and make it a fundamental part of the education of youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maestro David Whitwell, for these beautiful episodes in conversation with you. Thank you. Would you like to say a short greetings to the audience of the Major TV?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Would you like to say a short greetings to the audience of the Major TV?
No, but I would like to thank you for making these possible, these discussions. And I hope that there will be people among the listeners who profit from what they've heard. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Maestro David Whitwell, for further readings about these last but not least topics on the books on Amazon, American Music Education, The Enigma and the Solution. You can also watch all the 6 episodes on our YouTube channel and on Facebook. And see you soon also with our great friend, Maestro David Whitwell. Thank you for watching.